Okay, start. All right, so we left off with looking at personal observations, interviews, all that stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One of the dangers of using only an interview, or just the danger of just using only a personal observation, right, is that it can seem very limited to your own experience. We talked about that with the guy in the Middle East, and like we just assume these problems only happen over there because this is where this guy had seen all of this stuff. And the problem with that is that it, again, it makes it a very central thing. And the thesis or the argument of that podcast that I was talking to you guys about is that it was meant to illustrate like darkness in everyone's heart, right? So the psychologists balanced out that argument with looking at things like the Holocaust, the Khmer Rouge, and racism and segregation in the South, the United States, and all of these things. So you need a well-balanced approach. And these are all things that you can do to give your argument a well-balanced approach and a foundation. When you think about your essays and you think about your ideas, think about them as structures, like a physical structure. Does it have a solid base? Does it have a strong foundation, right? That's the most important thing for a structure, is that it have a strong foundation, solid base. We talked about this a time or two before. How many points do you need to have a strong, stable base? 3. All right? Think about those for your support, your body paragraphs, and on and on. You are to seek outside evidence which contradicts your point of view whenever you're looking at outside evidence and you find things that contradicts your point of view or that contradicts your argument and it weakens your argument. That is something not to shy away from. That's something to lean into, right? To really examine for 2 purposes. One is that the most obvious factor is that that it should, maybe your argument or maybe your idea or your philosophy or whatever you're trying to persuade, maybe it's wrong, right? And if there's enough evidence to support that, then you need to be open-minded enough to be able to change your point of view. That's one of the funniest things we have, and that gets labeled as but for good reason. Like in American politics, right? A politician gets labeled a flip-flopper, right? And that was I think it was John Kerry that got labeled a flip-flopper a lot. That was his title, and to a certain extent, like you want that, don't you? Like, do you want a politician? I don't want somebody that has believed the exact same thing for 30 years, despite evidence that it's not true in the first place, right? Like, you need people who are supposed to be able to change their minds. That's a good thing, right? But also a flip-flopper in politics is someone that just changes their point of view based on what is politically expedient at the time, right? So you have, that's a difficult situation really to look at, to decide if someone has actually changed their mind versus someone being a flip-flopper. If you look at it, like socially speaking or politically speaking, you can look at Hillary Clinton is a perfect example of this. Whenever Hillary Clinton ran this past election cycle against Donald Trump, obviously she's a Democrat, so anyone that is even left of center was going to vote for, even people that were right of center voted for Hillary Clinton. But anyway, left of center was going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And so, one of the big advocates for her was the LGBT community, right? And rightfully so in many respects, because she said that she represented much of their needs and values and things like that. But the irony of that is that Hillary Clinton did not change her stance. Hillary Clinton did not believe in same-sex marriage until like 2003. I think maybe it was 2013. It was like the 2000s. Hillary Clinton did not believe in same-sex marriage, and then it was early 2000s. Like recently, in the past 10 years, she changed her political point of view. Don't know if it's her personal point of view, but she changed her political point of view on same-sex marriage, which is kind of an astounding thing. Because, if a Republican says something that was anti-gay 20 years ago, they're still viewed as anti-gay now, right? If a Republican says, somebody on the right says something that is or could be construed as racist 20 years ago, well, believe me, they're still racist now, right? If it's a convenient thing for a political party or for politicians, depending on who they represent, for them to change their point of view, all can be forgiven, right? So no mention of the fact that, like, in 2000, Hillary Clinton was against gay marriage. Never brought up once, right? She quietly flipped her point of view, and then all was kind of swept under the rug. Now, whether her personal viewpoint on that changed or her political viewpoint on that changed, just because, like, now, if you are openly, I mean, if you're going to be a Democrat and be against same-sex marriage, you're not going to get elected anyway, right? If you are against same-sex marriage, you got to be a Republican, because that's like a clear divisive issue between a Republican or a Democrat, by and large, right? So then when you look at this stuff, and especially when you're trying to gauge this for yourself, right? When you look at someone, a politician or a political, a philosophical or religious leader, right? You know, one of the things that you have to constantly ask yourself is, well, I mean, are they doing this because it's politically expedient for them, because it benefits them to change their point of view, or do they actually evolve as a person, and have they become enlightened, or have they evolved and then become unenlightened? Whatever it is, right? So it's a question that you must ask yourself about other people, and it's something that you must do yourself. Also, the idea that you need to continue to look at other opposing points of view and not only lean into the stats, the statistics, and the opinions that only further your point of view. And I think we talked about the Flat Earth Society in here last time and how absolutely insane that thing is, but there's ample evidence, right? I've said it many times before. However you believe the world is, Google it and you will be reaffirmed of your beliefs, right? There's all the evidence in the world to support every single one of our own unique viewpoints, but that doesn't mean that it's real, right? So if you only lean into the things that support your point of view, you're going to go down a dark road. So, Carl Rogers. He was a psychologist, and he believed that the point of an argumentation, the goal should be to reduce conflict rather than to produce a winner and a loser. And you can see the results of this in many aspects of our society. So if you look at a very base level, raise your hand. Were any of you ever involved or a part of, or at least went to a high school that had a debate team? Anybody? I guess it's a pretty common thing, yeah. Okay. So my high school, I think most high schools have debate teams. I wasn't on the debate team myself. Actually, our school did this weird experiment where they were going to try to, it didn't really work either, but they were going to try to like combine like UIL academics along with the athletic departments and like force the two to kind of like hang out and support each other. So they would make like the football team go to Saturday UIL events and watch the debates, like the debate team. And so it didn't work out like they hoped that it would. But I was able to, when I was high school, I was on the football team, so I went and saw some of these debates with these, some of these debaters, they got more worked up than the football players did before games. It was insane. It was like a sport to these kids. They were all about it. And of course now they're all like, lawyers, wanted to be politicians and all that stuff. They have that trait, they have that personality type. But what was enlightening about watching that, and I see it even now, because Lamar will sponsor UIL events, and every once in a while I get dragged into debate to judge, the debates. And I just pretend like I know what I'm talking about when I judge them, because I don't. But what's interesting about the way that they have the whole thing set up is, right, it's a clear system of winner versus loser. So you're given an issue. And then, first, you're pro this issue, and then the opposing team is against the issue. And then you debate, and then you take a break, and then you come back. And then now you're against the issue, and they are pro the issue. All right? And it's set up as a winner or loser. But what gets lost is the issue. What's the issue? What's the truth of the issue? What's the true outcome of the issue? And then you can see, and what's interesting about that is that is training for lawyers now, they did that in high school. They were doing that in high school. They learned that stuff in law school. Politicians are the kind of people that were wearing suits and ties when they were 15 years old and debating on a Saturday morning. So are lawyers. That's a particular type of person. And that gets ingrained in them early on that you win or lose these debates. You win or lose your trials. You win or lose elections. And you see the ramifications of that in our society today, right? So, if you look at the justice system, right? You're supposed to be innocent until what?
Proven guilty.
Okay. What is the purpose of a prosecutor? To prove you guilty. Not to find out whether or not you're innocent or guilty in the first place. It doesn't matter what you are. He is there to prove that you are guilty. Right? Now, there are prosecutors that will work with defense attorneys and that will actually search for the heart of the matter. Right? But what you have set up is a system even down to police, at a very level of the enforcement and police authorities, right? Police officers have quotas that must be fulfilled, right? Assuming that a public must be guilty X amount of the time for them to keep their jobs in the first place. Everywhere from traffic tickets on up, right? We're assuming that people are this type of bad, and we're going to enforce that with regimented numbers, and then we're going to bypass it, or we're going to pass those along to a criminal justice system. Then you're going to be passed on to a prosecutor that's going to assume your guilt. And not only is he going to assume your guilt, he's going to work hard to prove your guilt, whether you are innocent or not. Not only that, there's an incentive for him. Because the more conviction rates that you get as a prosecutor, the higher your status rises because you're a no-nonsense type of prosecutor. And then whenever you're a no-nonsense type of prosecutor, that makes a great jumping board for a politician or for a judge. And who the hell doesn't want to be a judge? I want to get to wear like a gnarly black robe and judge people all day. Get paid to judge people? Like, that's awesome, right? And then whenever you get to convict them and give them your sentence, you can just talk down to them and stuff. Like, sign me up, right? But to do that, I got to throw a lot of people in jail as a prosecutor, right? Or to become a governor, right? You see this like, oh God, Texas is the worst. Like, we play into the whole Texas thing so bad, right? You'll have like the guy that wants to be a governor or a senator or something. He'll be like leaning up against like somebody else's ranch because he really didn't have a ranch. And have his cowboy hat on, a big belt buckle. Like, I've been putting criminals away for 30 years. Get out of here. Come on, right? He's there for a reason. So you have that set up against a defense attorney. And the defense attorney, obviously, he doesn't care whether you're guilty or innocent either, right? He's going to make you innocent. And there's an incentive for that because the more guilty people that you can get off, the richer the guilty people are going to come see you, right? It's like, I got all these other people off at this cost. I did that, so now my status has risen, and then now you're going to pay me a lot more to get your guilty ass off, right? That's exactly how our justice system has kind of mutated into this thing of winner and loser, and then the truth of justice gets lost, right? Because it's set up as rigged as a system of winning and losing. Same thing in the political world, right? So you have two different parties, right? You have the Republican Party and you have the Democratic Party. There are third parties, but those are basically an afterthought, really, right? And so now it's set up between a system of winning and losing. So in the past 10 years, you can see it now, you can see it in the previous administration, that the Democrats are not going to work with the Republicans, and the Republicans are not going to work with the Democrats on any level, right? So no matter if the Republicans come up with a good idea that could be beneficial for the country, the Democrats will refuse to communicate with them because that could be a win for the Republican Party. Not a win for the country, a win for the Republican Party. And vice versa. Democrats, they have a great idea. Republicans will not work for them because that would be a win for the Democrats, more power for the Democrats, and then so they will undercut them every bit of the way. And so the country itself, society itself, further corrodes because it's about one party winning over the other, right? And then the truth of the matter actually gets lost. So a perfect example of this is you can see the issues with Obamacare versus Trump's plan for health care, and you can remove completely removing whether or not public health care is something that we should have or not, completely taking that out, right? Look at they did a series of interviews where they were talking to people, talking to Republicans, and who hated Obamacare. That's a socialist. They hated Obamacare. They then started talking to them about I forget what they called it, but it was basically like Trump care. What about let me talk about Trump's new medical plan or health care plan for the country? And they started listing off all of these things. And the people that were in it was like, well, hell yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that. See, that's what we needed all along. And it was Obamacare. Right? It was like they pulled back the blindfold, whenever they do the blind taste test between the two orange juices, I'll love this orange juice. Like, you've been drinking Sunkist the whole time. Like, what? And you can see, whenever they reveal, oh, this is actually work. This is from Obamacare. This is not Trump's plan. And you can see them, they're trying to, process, but there's no way, because it came from that dude, from that party, there's no way that I agree with that, right? Because he's on that side, so there's no way in hell that he could ever come up with anything good that they might possibly agree with. And it's the exact same. I mean, it's not just, you could have reversed it, right? It could have been something the Republicans came up with, and they interviewed a bunch of Democrats, and they told them that it was a Democratic idea. And they'd be like, well, hell yeah, that sounds great. Of course, Democrats came up with it. No, really, it was Republicans. And you can just see like their minds start to melt and leak out of their ears, right? Because they can't equate the two. It's a system of win and loss. So here, by removing conflict, you're able to get much further. You do this by making a conscious effort to understand the viewpoints of those whom you disagree. So, whenever you look at the idea of removing conflict as well, I mean, this works from personal to professional, all the way down. Whenever you get into an argument with someone, the vast majority of the time, conflict leads to argument, argument leads to conflict, and sadly enough, the vast majority of that turns to heated debate, turns to spirited debate, turns to anger. And it works on every level, from the physical to the emotional to just the verbal. The physical level is just the easiest. I mean, I spent most of my life in gyms boxing, and man, you never let two people, especially people that have not been boxing long or that have not been fighting very long, you never let them spar without somebody else in the middle or someone there watching them. Because it turns from just playful boxing, and at the moment that just slight contact is made, the hits start getting harder and harder and harder and harder. And if there's not a third party, if there's not a mediator, it turns into a brawl fast within a split second. When boys wrestle outside with one another, when two brothers are just playfully wrestling, how long does that take to turn into chairs getting cracked over somebody's head? 2 minutes. Yep. Well, then they're patient then, because it's 30 seconds where I grew up, right? It's no time at all. So, and then that escalates to with emotional fights, or fights in relationships or whatever. What happens though, whenever you are able to remove conflict from the situation, also you look at talking about a physical thing, you look at fighting, something like that. By and large, the most success people that fight with out of anger and just pure fury are really fun to watch, for the first couple of years. And then they just end up getting destroyed, because you don't fight well if you're just enraged. In any level, physically, mentally, emotionally, you don't operate well, right? So when someone whenever you're in an argument with someone, right, and then nobody likes being angry. People that walk around being angry hate themselves, admittedly so, right? No one likes being angry. So when you get into an argument with someone and you allow them to make you angry, you have given over power yourself. You have given them power, and you've allowed a person to make you feel a way that you otherwise would never have chosen to feel, right? They own you. They control you. And people don't really see it that way, but if you step back, it is the absolute truth, right? So you remove conflict from the situation, right? And you're able to think clearly. That person, if someone is trying to get you angry, you're removing power from them as well. Now, again, that works in an actual altercation and actual conflict, but it also works in spirited debates, right? So, for you need to understand the viewpoints of those with whom you disagree. You need to open your essay with open, even-handed restatement of points of views. When it's appropriate, you need to acknowledge the validity of some arguments. And this is always important, right? I mean, if you listen to anybody that's done any type of counseling, especially like couples counseling or something like that, and then you can look at, the most important thing that you have to do whenever you have someone, when you have a marriage and or a boyfriend and girlfriend, whatever, and they're mad at you, right? And they think they feel all of these things, right? You've done this, and this. Like counseling 101, the first thing you have to say is I understand that you feel these things. I believe that your feelings are true. Like, you have to acknowledge someone's feelings. That doesn't acknowledge that it's real, that you have manipulated all these like Machiavellian schemes against them, but their feelings are honest feelings, right? So when you acknowledge someone's points of view, you acknowledge the validity of someone's ideas, someone's opinions, because most of the time that there are valid opinions to the opposing view, right? Because people aren't all crazy. Right? Very few people are actually crazy. Most people have their feet in reality in some form or another. Right? Whenever you meet, most of you guys are relatively young, and you're out I would assume, in the singles scene a little bit. So guys, whenever you meet a girl and the subject of ex-boyfriends comes up, right? And every single guy that she's ever dated has been a jerk to her and just treated her horribly. What's the first thing that you should do?
Check on the shoe. She must have stepped on something.
Yeah, run, get out of there, right? Because it's the exact same thing if a guy, like, a girl's talking to a guy, and like you start asking about his girlfriends, and they're like, well, she was crazy. Oh, she was crazy. Oh, she was the craziest one. If every single girlfriend of his that has been crazy, what should you do? Run away. Because he is the common denominator, and he's obviously the one that's making them crazy, right? He's not taking any responsibility of his own actions whatsoever. It's all them. Same thing with a guy, a girl that's like, oh, all my guys, they were jerks to me. They didn't treat me like I needed to be treated, and like, how do you think you need to be treated? I'm not sure. It's like the past 5 guys couldn't get it right. I'm doing the math, and I don't think I can either, right? Because people have those 5 guys that think that you think were jerk. Those 5 guys, they probably had something that they saw in you that you probably didn't like seeing. The girls, right? They're probably not all crazy. Obviously, they're not all crazy, right? You're the common denominator. They probably had a reason for thinking, or you probably had a reason for acting crazy in your mind. So you have to acknowledge someone's point of view if it's valid. You want to point out common ground. Areas of common ground. Focus on interests, values, and beliefs. And then you present your position, right? So by doing this, again, this removes much of the conflict. You find some common ground, and then people are much more likely to open up. I think I said this a time or two in some of the other classes. They just did a study, and they're talking about the fact that the least powerful form of argumentation persuasion is just, if you want to change someone's point of view, last thing to do is present them with a statistic or a fact. That's the absolute last thing to do. People don't care. They just dig their heels in even further. And that works on a human level. That also shows how, as a society, culturally speaking, how far we have devolved from analytical and critical thinking people, right? I mean, you can look at, I was just listening to an interview just the other day, and it was about the healthcare and healthcare industry. My daughter's generation is the first generation of human beings in like ever that their lifespan is lower than mine or ours because of chronic illness. In 2040, by the year 2040, if healthcare continues or chronic illness continues as it currently is, the entire federal budget will be completely dedicated to Medicare and Medicaid. The entire federal budget. So the money that we spend on roads, the money that we spend on bridges, traffic lights, military, the whole military budget, all of that, 100% of the federal budget is going to go directly to Medicare and Medicaid. Just looking at something like, right now there are 100 million people. 100 million people that are diabetic or pre-diabetic. And the average cost to treat someone that has diabetes is like $14,000 a year. And people get diabetes now. People are getting diabetes earlier and earlier and earlier. So you take someone that has diabetes whenever they get diabetes when they're 40, right? And the vast majority of that 100 million, most of them are pre-diabetic. But the people that are pre-diabetic, 88% of people that are pre-diabetic don't know it because they don't get checked out. And so they become diabetic. So of that 100 billion, you could estimate roughly that 90 million people in a few years are going to, in like 10 years, 90 million people are going to have diabetes. It costs $14,000 a year to care for one person that has diabetes. And then, you look at that person, they get diabetes when they're 30. And then it's $14,000 a year for that one person, and then they live till they're 60 or 70. Because healthcare now is about like keeping you, not making you better, it's just prolonging your life. And then that $14,000 a year for that person times 30 years if they stay alive is like a lot of money. And then you multiply that times 90 million. And it's like a Googleplex worth. Remember Googleplex? You guys don't use that word? I use that word, Google. It's like a super big number right under infinity. It's a ton of money to keep people that are just diabetic alive. And then if you look at the issues of diabetes, the vast majority of the people that are diabetic are type 2 diabetic. And type 2 diabetes is something that is 100% preventable, and in many cases can be reversed. Now, some of it lends itself to genetics, but the vast majority of diabetes comes down to a sedentary lifestyle, poor food choices, lack of exercise, and lack of sleep that ultimately an individual can correct themselves, right? Knowing all of that, if you were to tell that to an auditorium full of people, how much would all of those statistics corral their behavior and make them stop watching their iPad till 1 o'clock in the morning and eat fast food, stop eating fast food maybe once a month? How many people are going to stop doing that? Like none, right? This is like our lifetime that we were going to see we're going to see our children, your children, die earlier than you will die. Chronic healthcare issues. How much does that, all those statistics, how much does that influence behavior? None, right? It doesn't influence behavior whatsoever. It doesn't matter what statistics are thrown out there. If there's not some type of an emotional appeal to it, especially, again, the society and the world we live in, the type of people that we are now dealing with these statistics and facts like that, they don't mean anything to us anymore. Which is sad because they should, right? But that, again, that shows the way that we've a lack of critical thinking being taught to us in school, and then valuing critical thinking as a culture. So now, one of the most, and you know, that's fine, you have to roll with it. So now, to be persuasive to someone, to present an argument to someone, you must have an emotional appeal. There must be a story attached to it. There must be some type of pathos to it, supported with those facts. Okay. So, here. You want to use on point 7, page 553. We skipped a few things that are kind of secondary. You want to use induction or deduction. Inductive reasoning involves examination of specific cases, facts, or examples. Based on these specifics, you then draw a conclusion or make a generalization. This is the kind of thinking that scientists use when they examine evidence and they come to a conclusion. So look at this. Several people were mugged last month while shopping in the center of town. Evidence. Several homes and apartments were burglarized in the past few weeks. More evidence. Several cars were stolen from people's driveways over the weekend. More evidence. So the conclusion is that the police force hasn't adequately protected the town residents. Well, that's a conclusion for an argumentation essay. It says, with probable elements of persuasion. Yeah, you're going to need a lot of persuasion because that's a big leap, right? There are many factors that need to be examined, and many factors and pieces of evidence that are not included in those 3 bits of evidence to go to that conclusion. Versus this, the police force should take steps to upgrade its protection of town residents. That's a conclusion for an argumentation essay with a clearly persuasive intent, right? So it's telling, one, this is very open-ended, and it's not telling exactly what you want, what you're going to persuade. But this one is clearly telling us what we're going to do. It's clearly persuasive because it's telling us what actions need to be taken. Right? This is just like, well, the police hasn't done its job. This is the police needs to ramp up its security. Right? Also, this also takes into account many things that are this is a big leap. Right? Because these are things that are happening after the fact. Right? So, I don't know, maybe that community, for example, right? Maybe that community has gone through a bit of economic depression. You know, when people start losing their jobs, people become poorer and poorer. People start robbing more and more. People get bugged more and more. Maybe that town has gone through a shift in, or many of the families in that community have allowed the family structure to crumble around them, and thus their value structure continue to crumble around them. So values are not instilled in the home, and you have more people that are then going out and committing immoral acts or acts contrary to traditional values because it's not being taught at home, right? How does the police department combat that, right? If you look at it's the same thing with the education system, right? I mean, the education system, arguably, there's teachers that in many respects it doesn't take a lot to become to have a 4-year degree in like an elementary education in many places, right? Or in junior high. I mean, I went to school, I had junior high teachers that were amazing and engaging and made me rethink everything that I knew about life. But I also had teachers that came in and they read Sports Illustrated and they fell asleep, and I would throw spitwads into their mouth. I was like, oh, enough like that. Those were mainly my coaches that got some type of job teaching, like history or math for some reason. And they sucked, right? So, but you look at the school system, and there's no question about it. The education system is continuing to crumble around us. So you could say that it's obviously the teachers that are doing that, but at the other side, right? I mean, half of your learning is when I grew up. My grandmother raised me a lot. My grandmother raised me a lot. She made me sit down. Hell, she had to relearn math to help me learn math, right? She made me sit down. She made me learn. She made me read. She taught me, helped me teach me how to read by teaching me how to read through reading. Reading the Bible and doing like Bible lessons with her, because I spent so much time with her, and she was all into that. And so, that's something that was taught at home, and the value of an education. My family, the large part of my family is highly uneducated and did not come from a very wealthy. It came from a very poor background, and instilling the necessity for me to not be like that. And so, I said equal parts measure, right? Because I don't know how many, because I grew up with a bunch of people that didn't grow up like that as well. Right, so it's a two-pronged attack on the education system, and just to blame the teachers isn't going to work, right? Just like this, just blaming the cops isn't going to work, right? So you make certain leaps in your judgment. If you do that, you open yourself up for attack, right? Because this might be true, but there's not enough evidence here to support that claim. So you're going to have to, if that's what you're doing, then you're going to have to fill that in with some heavy emotional appeals. And we see this a lot. You have to be careful with your evidence, and you have to be careful with the leaps that you make with your evidence. We see this this goes just looking at statistics. Statistics don't mean anything if you're not careful with how you use them. So one of the things that you can look at, looking at big police officers and things like this. One of the things that has come to light over the past several years, they have these issues of conviction rates between two of basically the same drugs. There's powder coke. If you look at powder cocaine, white powder cocaine, and you look at crack cocaine. Basically at the chemical level, they are prepared, they're cut different, and then they are distributed differently, and they are distributed to the body, differently. But at the essence of what the drug is, it comes from the same thing. It is a highly addictive amphetamine, and there are different cultural and socioeconomic implications to the two types of drugs. Right, a particular type or group of people is more likely to be using powder cocaine versus a particular type of group that is more likely to be using crack cocaine. The type of, in general, I'm talking big sweeping terms here, in general, it is going to be richer, whiter, more affluent and educated people using powder cocaine. And then there's going to be poorer, black, inner city people using crack cocaine. And you can see how that's worked out in the criminal justice system, because this is the issue that has come up with the past several years, is that with all my crack that I have on me, if I got busted with crack cocaine, they could throw me under the jail with maximized jail time. Versus if I got caught with the same amount of powder cocaine, I would get a much less harsh, a much reduced jail sentence. Exact same drug, exact same quantity. Why?
Because you're white.
Okay. Well, because white people, the idea in terms of criminal justice, if you go back and you look at a big picture, right? So rich white people, they like to do the little powder, and then poor black people, they like to do the crack. Okay, so even though it's the same drug, so we're going to punish them differently. So now, one of the issues that we have in the United States is that there are instances of institutionalized racism, and there are instances where people that come from a certain socioeconomic background, certain racial background, get punished very differently from those that are not, or that don't fall into that category. But this is not one of them. But this has been coming up recently, because then you go back and you have to look at the other statistics. That the group of people that were actually behind sentencing much harsher for crack cocaine came heavily from, I'm almost 100% positive it was from Baltimore. But whichever city it was a city that was being eaten alive by the crack epidemic, and the people that pushed it were 95% black. It was coming from a police department that was 90% black. It was coming from a city council that was 85% black, and a mayor that was black. It came the necessity to punish for crack cocaine harsher than powder cocaine came from a black community and a black civil structure, right? Because they said this is tearing our community apart, and we need a deterrent for it. Okay, so if you don't know that bit of information, right, you can step back, and if you don't know that, you're like, well, white people trying to punish black people harsher from the same thing that they're doing. That's institutionalized racism, and that would be true. But then you take in this other element. Okay, hold on. This was pushed heavily by people of the same color that see it tearing their community apart and want a heavy deterrent for it. Well, that changes things, right? 100% it changes things, right? It doesn't change at the end. It doesn't change the end result, but it changes your argument there, right? And it doesn't say that there's not institutionalized racism in other areas. But this is something that's been coming up, recently. And you got to hold on. You got to look at it. You got to look at it. Look at all the facts. Also, this leads to things called logical fallacies. If you look here on, it's on page 559. You have to recognize logical fallacies. So, oftentimes, you'll have your evidence, and then you'll have your claim, right? And then you need to make sure that your evidence is going to equate to your claim. You see this a lot. Logical fallacies are that. What I just used as an example is not a logical fallacy. That's a jump in reasoning. But that ties into logical fallacies. You're surrounded right now. Our culture is so much. We are drowning in logical fallacies that people believe and they pass off like as if it's a religion. One of the things that you can look at right now is some of the issues that we have with identity, equality, gender, and race. So, if I were to, I think I brought this up a time or two before. If I were to be a writer on a television show, and I was going to write about my life, it happened to me, right? And I was going to hire three writers, and I've had female friends, I've had girlfriends, I have a wife, right? So, if I was going to write about that, and I hired three writers, if I hired three males, I would be told that I need to have a female writer there. I need to have a female writer there because I need to have a female's point of view on or speak for a female. Which, fair enough, that's a great point. But at the same time, we also live in a society that is obsessed with the idea that there is no difference between a male and a woman. Right? So a man can do anything a woman can do. A woman can do anything that a man can do. So much so that there is no biological difference between a male and a female, and there's no difference between a male and a female mind. I got a 2-year-old daughter. Every time that I get home, she screams, "Daddy!" jumps up in my arms, and asks me to put a Disney princess gown on her. And I ain't the princess type. Like I didn't push that on her, right? I don't have an affinity for pink things and jewels and like the things. She's got expensive taste, and it horrifies me because she's only 2 years old. I don't. I drive the same beat up truck that I have been driving for 10 years and will till the tires fall off of it. Right? But she's got expensive taste. She must have got it from her. She got it from mom. But anyway, don't tell me that there's not a difference between the way that a woman thinks and the way that a little girl thinks and the way that a little boy thinks. I have friends that have little boys, and they are just complete hellions, right? That just they pillage and they destroy and they crap on everything. They either break it or they take a dump on it. That's it. And that's not my 2-year-old daughter, right? And that's not little girls. It's not. So tell me, why should I hire a female to represent a female's point of view if a female is the exact same as a man? If we don't think differently, which is culturally, that's what we're told. Now, that's accepted as a common truth. There is no difference in the way that you think and the way that I think. So why should I hire you? That's that's a flaw in reason. If you look at something like the idea of people talk about now a very, very common thing is cultural appropriation, which in and of itself is a lie. If you look at cultural appropriation is assuming that a group of people own a culture, and culture is not something that is owned, and it's never owned by a race ever. All culture has continued to spread throughout the history of humanity, and generation after generation after generation. Black people do not own dreadlocks. Anybody that has long hair that that goes for long periods of time without Washington and it clumps together has dreadlocks. Vikings had dreadlocks thousands of years ago, and Vikings are the whitest dudes that have ever existed. Chinese have had dreadlocks. The Romans had dreadlocks, cornrows, braids. That is a biological thing that the growth of hair and it clumping together and the arrangement of patterns of hair is something that's not existed. That's not exclusive to a people that have a color of skin, right? It's a flawed reasoning, and people believe it because it becomes like a religious belief, despite the logic not equating. We talked about race, right? In the United States, the definition of racism has changed in the United States recently. There's a large group of people that are trying to push the idea that racism is about privilege and power. So in the United States, the only person that can be racist in the United States is a white person, which in and of itself is a racist thing to say, right? Only white people can be racist. Well, what? Well, because it's not about race, it's about privilege and power. Then it's not about race, right? To assume, right? Because again, assuming that black people, it's even insulting, right? Black people don't have power, so they can't be racist. They don't have privilege and power, so they can't be racist. Asian people can't be, because they're a minority in this country, they can't be racist. Hispanics can't be racist. I've lived a lot of my life with Asians. Ain't nobody more racist than Asians, believe me. They're racist against other Asians. Hispanics are racist against other Hispanics. You can ask someone from Nicaragua versus someone from Venezuela what they feel about each other. Huh. Get out of here. That only white people can be racist. That is a logical fallacy and it's a lie. And people drink it like Kool-Aid. They believe these things because they do not think analytically. They do not think critically for themselves. Before I let you go, I need to show you one thing. All right, so this is the Huffington Post. The Huffington Post is one of the major news organizations, one of the major news organizations across the globe. This is like an editor's meeting, right? They basically run the paper, all right? And then, see, notice anything about this meeting?
They're all women.
And what?
White women.
And white. And they were doing this, they posted this to promote diversity. What is diverse about this picture?
Nothing.
The assumption that they are women, they're a collective group of women, so they are then diverse, right? And this was promoted. I mean, this was promoted as it was like, look at diversity in the workplace. What? How is this diverse in the workplaise? How is this any different than a group of white dudes with white hair? Right, and their clothes that don't fit well, and their saggy double chins. How is like the picture of like oppression and the patriarchy in this society? Right, if they would have tweeted that out, it would have been like, oh, look at all these white people ruining our lives. There's a group of white women controlling a major news organization, but it's not seen as the same thing because they're women, and that's a logical fallacy. It's a flaw in reasoning. And again, like I said, people drink it up. These logical fallacies are everywhere. And we'll talk about that. I'm going to point them out like one by one for you and let you know what they are. Because if you're able to identify logical fallacies, it helps you be able to navigate a minefield of the rest of your life of people trying to, like I said, like ideas, they really matter. They change the way that you view the world. They change the way that you raise your children, the way that you spend your money, the way that your relationships get. Everything about your life is centered around like cultural ideas that are bombarded into you. And if you don't know how to navigate the minefield, you will find yourself like up a river of BS. So next class, that's what we're going to look at, and then we'll move on to writing our essay. Next week, I'll be passing back your essays next week as well.